Hey guys, what's good? Welcome back to GDB Selects. Round 22 done and dusted. That means we do just only have 5 more rounds of the regular season left. My word, it has gone by at lightning quick pace. It feels like just yesterday we were yearning for the footy to be back, and now we are getting to the pointy end of the season, and it won't be long before we are left with that massive hole in our lives. So let's just make sure we do enjoy these final 5 weeks and the finals, because you certainly don't know what you've got until it's gone. Now, before we get into this week's video, as always, I do just want to give our free Discord server a massive plug. We're trying to make the Oceania Oracle the biggest South Pacific Australasian Discord server, your go-to place when you think of betting in rugby league. So do consider becoming a member. It is completely free. If you had followed all of our free tips, you'd be up over 180 units year to date. An incredible result, and again, completely free, no strings attached. So do scan the QR code shown on screen or hit the link in the video description to become a member today. Alright, now let's talk some footy, and going over last week's results, we only tipped 4 out of 8 games. I'm a wee bit disappointed with that. I thought the Eels gave it a good shake against the Storm. The poor old Raiders and Bulldogs absolutely hate playing in the rain, and the Cowboys are just the Cowboys. Poor tip on my part. That does leave us at 58% for the season, still hovering around the average pass mark. Very disappointed though, and trust me, once you see my tips this week, you're going to probably think I've lost the plot, but I do have to try and make some places up, so that's what we're trying to do, so do bear with me. And if we take a look at the tipping comp ladder, we do have a 4-way tie atop the ladder, even having a dual first position tie, right? Brady's bunch and, both in first and second place with 111 points and the exact margin of 249. That's pretty crazy. I'm sure that'll get sorted out this weekend. Very, very unlikely that they'd finish the season with the same points and the same margin, but my word, maybe they will. Maybe we'll see it first. Manawatu Turbo still climbing up that leaderboard, up into 5th spot, just 1 point behind. I told you he was a dark horse for this competition, and now he is there within striking distance with 5 weeks to go. Good luck to everyone on that top 20 leaderboard. Here are my tips and predictions for round 23. Alright, round 23 gets underway on Thursday night, and we have the Melbourne Storm taking on the Brisbane Broncos in Melbourne at Amy Park. Alright, and if we start first with the Storm, who secured a gritty 16-10 point victory over the Parramatta Eels to kick off round 22 at CommBank Stadium despite the absence of Jerome Hughes. It was yet another clunky performance from Melbourne, who scored 2 of their 3 tries thanks to the cheat codes in the air that are Xavier Coates and Ali Katoa, but outside of that were far from convincing despite having a mountain of possession and a superior completion rate. Stefano Utekomanu racked up 178 metres in his 54-minute stint, with 80 coming post-contact and 10 tackle breaks, bumping off Parramatta players like they were teenagers. Ryan Pappenhausen ran for over 200 metres but had a pretty poor night in his return from injury, converting at just 25% and coming up with a couple of uncharacteristic errors. Despite their flaws though, the Storm once again did enough to secure 2 competition points and all but assured themselves a place in the top 4. Now, in terms of teams list for the Storm, Nelson Asafa-Solomona is free to return this week after serving his suspension for that stray elbow. Alec McDonald and Moses Leo are both listed to be available for selection as well. And as for the Broncos, they delivered a commanding second half performance against the South Sydney Rabbitohs at Suncorp Stadium, securing a dominant 60-14 point victory. Brisbane were met with strong resistance from Souths in that opening 20 minutes before the speed and footwork of Reece Walsh and Ezra Mam got them on the board before scoring 7 second half tries to trample the Bunnies in a frenetic final 40 minutes. Katoni Staggs, Dean Mariner and Mam all picked up try doubles, with the Broncos outside backs breaking countless tackles and running riot as fatigue took hold of their opponents. Despite scoring 60 points, I wouldn't call it, clinical from the Broncos, who ended up making more errors and conceding more penalties than their injury-ravaged opponents, and now have to make the hardest road trip in the NRL to take on the Storm in Melbourne. And if we take a look at the teams list for the Brisbane Broncos, Payne Haas was ruled out late with that skin infection, but should be ready to play this week. Brendan Piakura suffered yet another head knock at training, so his return is still unknown. While Xavier Willison unfortunately broke his arm against the Rabbitohs and will require surgery, and is obviously looking at around at least 6 weeks on the sidelines. Alright, looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Storm, they have won a whopping 26 of the past 29 meetings between the two sides. Melbourne have also won 8 straight at Amy Park, dating back to 2016. And because I absolutely hate the Melbourne Storm, and need to make up a few tips, I'm going to take the Brisbane Broncos here by 1 to 12 points. I do think the Melbourne Storm haven't been anywhere near their best in recent weeks. Neither have the Broncos though, and I do think if the Broncos are any chance to win the comp this year, they will be eyeing this game as a real test. If they can't get past Melbourne in the regular season, they have no chance of taking them down in finals. So I think this is a really, really big game for the Broncos, who really want to prove to themselves and to their fans that, you know, they can compete with those top 4 sides. So I'm going to do it, mainly because I hate the Storm. Broncos, 1 to 12. Alright, moving now to the first of 2 games on Friday this weekend, and we do start with the Newcastle Knights taking on the Penrith Panthers at McDonald Jones Stadium. And if we start first with the Knights, they should be refreshed after their final bye of the season. However, the week prior they were put to the sword by the Canberra Raiders at home, 44 points to 18. Newcastle looked good in their opening half, going toe-to-toe with the ladder-leading Green Machine, entering the sheds locked at 18 all thanks to tries from Kai Pearce-Paul, Greg Marju and Fletcher Hunt. Unfortunately, that was all she wrote for the Knights, who failed to score any second half points while conceding 4 tries and 26 points as the Raiders turned it on once again. Newcastle were their own worst enemies, finishing the game with just a 66% completion rate and 13 errors, and once again they lacked that same kind of X factor on attack as their opponents. The one consistent shining light has been Dane Gagai, who has really gone to another level at fullback and has reminded everyone of his class and work ethic given the added responsibility. It's been the same issues for the Knights all season and yet nothing changes. Funny that. Now in terms of teams lists for Newcastle, Bradman Best and Brodie Jones are both listed to make their returns this week. And as for the Panthers, they secured a dramatic 30 to 26 point victory over the Gold Coast Titans in a thrilling golden point encounter at Cbus Super Stadium, with Nathan Cleary once again cementing himself as the most clutch player of our time. The Panthers dominated the first half, racing to a 24-0 lead with tries from Thomas Jenkins, Dylan Edwards, Blaise Talangi and Casey McLean, which were all converted by Cleary, who has only missed a mind-blowing 4 conversions all season in the NRL. Penrith must have thought they'd done enough in the first half because they were completely out-enthused by the Titans in the second, who scored 4 tries and 26 unanswered points of their own to lead 26-24 with just 6 minutes left on the clock. It'd be remiss of me not to bring up the Panthers trainer that ran, directly in front of Jaden Campbell as he tried to convert their final try, which would have ultimately given them, a 4-point lead, which, would have proved pivotal, but instead we got to witness yet another iconic Cleary moment, with Nathan hitting that 2-point field goal with less than 2 minutes on the clock to force the game into golden point. Cleary then played a key role in the game-winning play to get Casey McLean one-on-one with the back rower before Blaise Talangi scored under the post to increase Penrith's win streak to 8. What an unbelievable game that was. You've got to, tip your hat to Cleary and the Panthers. Very, very impressive. Now, in terms of teams list for Penrith, Isaiah Yeo failed to finish that game with a shoulder injury, and Penrith's poor form did coincide with his departure, so, keep an eye on teams list. He'd be a massive loss for them. And Scott Sorensen is also listed to return this week. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Knights, they beat the Origin-depleted Panthers earlier this season for the first time since 2018. Before that, though, the Panthers, they had won 9 of the last 10 meetings. Pretty straightforward one for me. I think the Panthers train rolls on. Panthers for me by 1 to 12 points. Alright, and the final game on Friday night has the Canberra Raiders taking on the Manly Sea Eagles at GIO Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Raiders, who had their charge towards a club record winning streak snapped by the St. George Illawarra Dragons, 18 points to 12 at WIN Stadium. The match was played in challenging conditions with rain and wind gusts estimated at around 50 km per hour, playing a huge factor and not allowing the Green Machine to play their normal high-octane style that has defined their season to this point. Despite playing the first half into the win, Canberra scored all of their points in that opening half and could count themselves lucky to be locked at 10-all at the break with an uncharacteristic 55% completion rate. Jamal Fogarty struggled to handle the conditions off the boot in that second half, kicking dead multiple times, and was unable to turn the tide for his side like he so often does in normal conditions. I think that's one of those games that Ricky and the Raiders, probably won't be too mad about losing given the circumstances, and what it will do too is give them plenty of motivation heading into one of the most promising finals campaigns for the club in a few years. Good news too for the Raiders is Matty Nicholson is listed to make his return this week, which would be his first game since round 10 against the Bulldogs. And as for Manly, in a hard-fought encounter at a rain-soaked Four Pines Park, the Sea Eagles were comprehensively defeated by the Sydney Roosters, 20 points to 4. Manly's only try came in the first half, and outside of that, their attack looked really flat and pretty predictable. Conditions certainly didn't make it easy, but Manly finished the match with a 67% completion rate, with 15 errors and an 8-4 penalty count in the favour of the Roosters. DCE and Luke Brooks weren't able to take control, getting outplayed by the brilliance of Sam Walker and the robotic-esque consistency and distance of Hugo Savala. You could argue it was a vintage Manly performance, but there were certainly plenty of excuses to point to, with HIAs forcing reshuffles and torrential rain making it a challenge for all involved. And the night got worse for the Sea Eagles too, as Ben Trbojevic failed his HIA, meaning he will be unavailable for this week's game as well. Alright, looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Sea Eagles, they have won 11 of the last 15 games against the Raiders. Manly also beat the Raiders earlier this season, 40 points to 12. And I do think Canberra need a big bounce back this week and will obviously be out for blood and redemption against the Sea Eagles for that loss earlier this year. I think their forward pack should be far too strong. Manly are light on middles as is. So I'm going to take the Raiders to bounce back at home just by 1 to 12 points. Alright, moving now to the first of 3 games on your Super Saturday, and we do start with the St. George Illawarra Dragons taking on the Cronulla Sharks at Jubilee Stadium. And if we do start first with the Dragons, they kept their season hopes alive with a shock 18-12 upset over the ladder-leading Canberra Raiders at Jubilee Stadium. Playing into a punishing 50-kilometre winds and sporadic weather conditions, the Dragons overcame the odds, dominating possession for long stretches and holding out the Raiders' normally clinical attack. I thought both Kyle Flanagan and Laiken King Tongia were really strong for the Saints, and both kicked really well given the conditions, especially Flanagan off the tee. I also thought Emre Gula and David Klemmer also played key roles, really taking it to the Canberra Raiders' physical forward pack and not allowing them to play on the front foot as they have done for most of the season. The victory was much needed and well deserved, and also keeps their faint playoff hopes alive with remaining games against a mixture of top 4 and bottom 4 sides. I also don't think the Saints are expecting anyone back this week, and given the results, I doubt we'll see Shane Flanagan make any changes. And as for the Sharks, they piled on the points to secure a comprehensive 32-12 point victory over the North Queensland Cowboys at Shark Stadium to wrap up round 22. Cronulla ran riot in that opening half, scoring 26 unanswered points in an extremely one-sided affair. Adam Fanua-Blake was strong through the middle, scoring a try and running for over 150 metres. It seemed like once again the Sharks struggled to go on with the job, only adding their lone second half try and lacking that same intensity that they had in the first 40. Hines and Trindle were also pretty quiet and certainly didn't shoot the lights out, but did do enough against a really lackluster and limp Cowboys side. The win now sets up a massive derby against the Dragons, who will be primed to finally break through. Toby Rudolph is the only player due back this week, having missed last week due to concussion. KL Aero is still on track for a return this season and is eyeing that in around round 26 or 27. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Sharks, they have won 10 straight against the Dragons. That does also include a 30-18 point victory earlier this year. And I'm going to take the Dragons to finally break through and snap that 10-game streak against the Sharks. I really did like what I've seen from the Dragons for most of the season, to be fair. And the Sharks, they just lack something. There's something about the Sharks that even though they put, 32 points on the Cowboys, you weren't really that impressed. You weren't blown away. There was no X factor, no it factor. You can't really put your finger on it. They just lack something. And I think the Dragons, after a big win last week, at home in front of what should be a pretty big crowd, can get it done. Finally break through against arch rivals Cronulla. So yeah, Dragons for me, 1 to 12. Alright, moving now to the second game on Saturday night. We do have the Dolphins hosting the Sydney Roosters at Suncorp Stadium. Alright, if we do start with the Dolphins, who edged out the Warriors 20 points to 18 in a dramatic encounter at Go Media Stadium over here in Auckland. The match was certainly a nail-biter and was decided in the dying moments by a spectacular try from winger Jermaine Isako, who capitalised on a disorganised Warriors defensive line after a crucial late penalty gave the visitors prime field position. The Dolphins started strongly with centre Herbie Farnworth scoring early, but his momentum was halted by a hamstring injury that forced him off the field. Despite this, the Dolphins continued to press, scoring 2 quick tries through Jeremy Marshall-King and Oren Keeley. I think it's fair to say that the Finns' attack did look less threatening with Farnworth on the sideline, and they also failed to score a second half point until the dying stages, and when Felice Kaufusi was sin-binned, it looked like they'd fall just short, but, to their credit, they made the most of their limited second half chances, which was enough to pip the Warriors at the post, allowing them to leap up the ladder in their quest for a maiden finals appearance. Bad news for Finns fans too, as Herbie Farnworth is facing at least 6 weeks on the sideline with that hamstring injury, which will be, a massive blow for the Dolphins. Jermaine Isako also played through a groin injury but should be ready to go again this week. And Kulikefi Finifuiaki is trying to overcome a thumb injury and is expected to return within the next fortnight. And as for the Roosters, they secured what could be a crucial 20-4 point victory over the Manly Sea Eagles in heavy rain conditions at 4 Points Park to leapfrog their opponents. Roosters halfback Sam Walker was instrumental, contributing with the boot for 2 first half tries, helping Sydney to a 12-4 halftime lead despite limited possession in Manly's end. Manly opened the scoring, but it certainly wasn't long before Billy Smith capitalised on a neat grubber from Sam Walker to score, and soon after Angus Crichton crossed off a crossfield kick from Walker, extending the lead to 12-4. The difficult and wet conditions only intensified in the second half, with Roosters forward Egan Butcher scoring next to the post after collecting yet another crossfield kick from Walker, pushing the score to 20 points to 4 by the 50th minute. Both teams struggled to finish sets in that last quarter as the weather well and truly took hold, but the Tricolours held on to take home the Gotcha for Life Cup for the 4th time and moved one step closer to a top 8 finish. The Roosters also picked up no new injuries, so I do expect no changes to their 1-17. Alright, looking at the two sides head to head, the Dolphins, they won the inaugural encounter between the Roosters, but since then the Roosters have won 3 straight, and I do think the Roosters make it 4. I think the Dolphins attack, certainly will miss Herbie, and the Roosters with Walker and Savala back in the side are different, right? I think you can put their loss a few weeks earlier down to the Townsend selection, and I think outside of that, the Roosters are really starting to find their feet. So I'm going to take the Chooks here by 1-12. Alright, and the final game on Saturday has the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs taking on the bloody Warriors over there at Accor Stadium. Alright, if we start first with the Bulldogs, who suffered a shock loss to the West Tigers in trying conditions at CommBank Stadium, going down in the Lockie Galvin Cup 28 points to 14. The Tigers took command early, capitalising on Bulldogs' errors and scoring 4 tries in the first half to seize a commanding 24 lead by half-time. Canterbury have struggled in the rain this season, and Sunday was no different, completing at an uncharacteristic 67% with 13 errors and 11 penalties. Even having 10 minutes with a one-man advantage couldn't spark the Dogs' attack, instead being outscored by the Tigers during the sin-bin period. Stephen Crichton had a mixed bag, he produced some really classy moments on attack, but was also probably guilty of trying a little bit too hard to get his side back into the contest. Jacob Carraz also had some nice touches at fullback and ran for a game-high 170 metres, but wasn't immune to the handling errors that plagued the entire Dogs pack. Unfortunately, guys, I am expecting a big bounce back this week. And in terms of teams list for Canterbury, Sitili Tupanua is the only player listed to return this week. And as for the Warriors, they suffered a devastating 20-18 point defeat to the Dolphins, culminating in an 80th minute try by Dolphins winger Jermaine Isako that sealed the win for the visitors and stunned the crowd at Go Media Stadium. It was a valiant performance from the Warriors, who were already beset with the loss of James Fisher-Harris, Chanel Harris-Tavita, Wade Egan and Dimitri Vaimolga. The Kiwis showed a ton of heart and managed to grind their way back into the lead at 18 points to 16 with 15 minutes to go, spearheaded by Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, who turned back the clock, racking up 335 run meters with 106 of those coming post-contact and 7 tackle breaks to boot. You've got a feel for poor old Dallin Martinez-Lesniak, who after a poor run of form picked up a try double but ultimately gave away the penalty that gave the Dolphins field position in the dying stages despite playing with a man in the bin. The loss certainly puts their top 4 spot massively under threat from the Panthers, who are now just 1 point behind, meaning they'll likely need to win almost every game from here on out to secure it. There is good news for the Warriors though, and that is that Wade Egan and Chanel Harris-Tavita are both expected to return this week, while James Fisher-Harris is eyeing his return the following week against the Dragons. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Warriors, they have won 6 of the last 8 meetings between the two clubs. However, the Bulldogs, they won both meetings last season. And I do think the Doggies bounce back very strong at home. I think it's a tough road trip for the Warriors, who are just dealing with too many big injuries to key players at the wrong time of the year. And off the back of a big loss, or shock loss should I say, from the Doggies, I think they'll get it. I think they'll get it done. So unfortunately, I'm going against my side again and taking Canterbury by 1 to 12. Alright, moving now to the first of two games on Sunday, and we do start with the Gold Coast Titans taking on the South Sydney Rabbitohs at Cbus Super Stadium in what is basically Spoon Bowl 2025. And if we start with the Titans, they staged a remarkable second half comeback against the Penrith Panthers in round 22 of the NRL, but ultimately fell short in a thrilling 30-26 defeat in Golden Point. The Panthers dominated that first half, building a commanding 24-0 lead at the break. However, the Titans rallied fiercely in the second half. Halfback Jaden Campbell led the resurgence with a standout performance, running for 241 metres, breaking 11 tackles and scoring that crucial 90-metre intercept try. Philip Sami crossed twice, while both Brian Kelly and Sam Verrills contributed tries, edging the Titans ahead 26-24 with just minutes remaining before Nathan Cleary forced Golden Point with a 2-point field goal for the ages. Mentally, I think the field goal broke the Titans' spirit and ultimately conceded a Golden Point try to let one of the biggest upsets of the season slip through their fingers. I do think they were certainly hard done by the actions of that Penrith trainer during, Campbell's conversion, but I also don't think it cost them the game. I know that's a very hotly contested topic, and again, completely wrong and unnecessary, but ultimately it didn't cost them the game. You really do, though, have to feel for both Des Hasler and the Titans. They really deserve to win that one. And as for the Rabbitohs, they faced a heavy defeat against the Brisbane Broncos at Suncorp Stadium, going down 60 points to 14 in an extremely one-sided affair. Brisbane flexed their muscles in that second half, scoring 7 unanswered tries as fatigue and the inexperience of the Bunnies began to shine through due to being severely hampered by injuries and suspensions, including captain Jack Whiten's absence after a 4-match suspension. Despite some moments of resilience in their opening 20 minutes, the depleted Rabbitohs could not match the Broncos' intensity or execution and now sets up almost a must-win game against the Titans, which will obviously go a long way to deciding who wins the spoon this season. And in terms of teams list, I'm not even going to bother going through all the Rabbitohs injuries. There's just far too many. Alright, looking at the two sides, head-to-head, the Rabbitohs, they have won 15 of the last 17 games against the Titans. That includes 9 straight. The Gold Coast, they've also never beaten Souths at Cbus Super Stadium. And man, this is a tough one. I had a few conversations with people on my Discord server tonight actually about who to tip here and whether the market's got it right. I'm going to side with the market and take the Gold Coast Titans here by 1 to 12 points. I think, yes, they'll be pretty fatigued after that big effort against the Panthers, but I do think they've got far more class in their roster compared to the Bunnies, who are just so depleted. They even played with no 18th man on the weekend, which is just mental, almost unheard of. So, yes, the stats do heavily favour the Rabbitohs, but I do think the Titans should get it done at home. Alright, and the final game of round 23 has the Parramatta Eels up against the North Queensland Cowboys at CommBank Stadium. Alright, starting first with the Eels, who put up a brave fight against the Storm in a tightly contested contest at CommBank Stadium, ultimately falling 16 points to 10. Parramatta had plenty of good ball chances in their opening half, but handling and unforced errors released any pressure on their opponents, coming up with 14 total errors to Melbourne's 7. Defensively, the Eels looked so connected, and to their credit conceded 2 of their 3 tries, 2 genetic freaks who were almost unstoppable in those positions, but outside of that moved as a unit all night and looked pretty strong. I thought Joas Papali was really safe and reliable at the back. Josh Adokar was also a standout again and has continued his strong career resurgence out west, but their attack does lack a little bit of venom or creativity. It's pretty clear that putting a kick up to Lomax isn't going to work every single time, and teams will certainly come up with ways to counter that and shut it down. But with that being said, they are in a rebuild phase and are certainly showing plenty of signs despite sitting 15th on the ladder. And in terms of teams list for Parramatta, Kalma Tuolangi is the only player that might be recalled this week. Outside of that, Isaiah Ayongi is still eyeing a return in round 25 or 26 from that hand injury that's kept him sidelined since round 20. And as for the Cowboys, they dished up one of their worst performances of the season, getting steamrolled by the Cronulla Sharks 32 points to 12. North Queensland seemed to have left their attitudes back up in Townsville and were blown off the park in the opening half, conceding 26 unanswered points, with the Sharks cutting through their soft middles like a hot knife through butter. Things went from bad to worse, with captain Tom Dearden spending 10 minutes in the sin bin, thwarting any chances of a second half comeback. They played like the worst defensive side in the competition and have slowly been sliding further and further down the ladder, and I think it's probably time for the Cowboys to part ways with Todd Payten. I personally don't like blaming coaches, but it's pretty clear that it's just not working, and his breakout debut season as coach was certainly just a flash in the pan. More bad news for the Cowboys too, with Robert Derby leaving the field with a knee injury, so will certainly be in doubt this week. Looking at the two sides head-to-head, the Eels, they have won 5 of the last 7 against the Cowboys. That includes 3 straight at CommBank, and I do think they make it 4 straight. I'm going to take the Eels here by 1 to 12 points. I can't believe I tipped the Cowboys last week, and they'll probably end up turning up and beating the Eels. But hey, we're going with the Eels this week. Defensively, they should be far too strong for the Cowboys side, who are just absolute basket cases. So there we go. Round 23, done and dusted. Thank you as always for watching, guys. We are done for another week. Do leave a like on the video, drop your tips and predictions in the comments down below, and I will see you next week. Maybe, although I might take the week off, we'll let you know.